Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, Tony Boniface is going to tell us how Andrew Bain came to prepare single-handedly the first geological map of South Africa. Tony came to South Africa in 1963 to work on the 82-kilometer-long Orange Fish Tunnel and married a South African girl, Veronica, in 1968. He then went on to work with Kiwi Steyn and partners for just over 30 years on a variety of tunneling projects in South Africa, and finally on phase one of the Lesotho Islands water project. Tony Veronica then spent over 4 years in the Far East before returning to South Africa in 2003 to work on the Ingula pump storage scheme and Gautrain. Being a hardcraper like me, he has always had more than a passing interest in matters geological. Now over to you, Tony.
Good morning, everybody. This is a tale about the lives of some 19th century fathers of geology and how Andrew Bain came to produce single-handedly the first geological map of South Africa. I first became interested in Andrew Bain some 25 years ago when I started writing about the history of tunneling in Southern Africa. It had been suggested to me that Andrew Bain may have built the very first tunnel, other than for mining purposes, on his farm Blockdrift in about 1835. This farm was located near the present-day town of Alice in the Eastern Cape. Several years ago, accompanied by members of my family, we carried out a field visit and searched the area where it would have been as described by Andrew Bain in a letter dated the 3rd of July 1847. In referring to an irrigation channel he had built on the farm, he described in the letter how this channel carried a large stream of water that I led out of the Chumi through a small tunnel. Although it was very easy to find the remnants of the irrigation furrow, we could not find any evidence of any small tunnel that would have been the takeoff point in the stream. And by the way, it is generally accepted that the first tunnel built, other than for military or mining purposes, was the Phillips irrigation tunnel built near Hankey in the Eastern Cape, which was put into service in 1844. But now, let's get back to what we know about Andrew Bain. Last week, Camille, a descendant of Bain, gave us a fascinating and very detailed and personal account of the life and times in which he lived. In the course of her presentation, she mentioned Bain's geological map of South Africa, the first of its kind. But to fully appreciate the work and effort Bains had put into the making of that map, one needs to be reminded of the general state of geological knowledge at the time in England. Much of my story has to do with fossils, which, as we all know, are traces of organisms or mammals buried naturally and preserved permanently by a process of mineralization. As early as the 6th century BC, Xenophanes of Colophon puzzled over the existence of imprints of shells, fish, and other creatures that could be seen in quarries and even on mountaintops. But it was only in the late 18th and early 19th centuries that certain men with inquiring minds came to an understanding of exactly what they were and how they could be used to date the sedimentary rock formations in which they were found. In his book entitled The Genesis Enigma, Andrew Parker presents a hypothesis that the sequence of events as set out in the first chapter of Genesis in the Bible is in fact scientifically correct. Using his knowledge of paleontology, he takes the reader through the creation passage, quoting evolutionary paleontological evidence, confirming each and every stage. And in doing so, he endeavors to provide a bridge between science and religion. In the 18th and 19th centuries in England and other parts of Europe, there wasn't sufficient scientific knowledge for anyone to do so. Some tried, but following Galileo's run-in with the Pope, science and religion continued to be largely at loggerheads. And even today, it is evident that many feel that science and religion cannot be reconciled, but of course, others do. What was going on in Europe in the latter part of the 18th century and the early part of the 19th century? Well, it was a period of immense change. The traumatic French Revolution had taken place. Bonaparte had become successively emperor, was defeated at Waterloo, and incarcerated firstly in Elba and finally on St. Helena, where he died in 1821. And the future Queen Victoria was still quite young. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and major changes were taking place, not only in agricultural production, but in society as a whole. It was a period where applied science increasingly intruded into the realm of everyday life. The building and use of canals for transport of heavy goods was booming. The steam engine was invented, and railways then became the thing, with the Stockton-Darlington Railway being opened for commercial operation in 1825. Having briefly described the milieu of the times in Europe, we now need to remind ourselves as to how the science of geology came into being. In publishing his 3-volume Principles of Geology between 1830 and 1833, Charles Lyell popularized James Hutton's concept of uniformitarianism, which viewed the Earth as being continually shaped and reshaped by the same processes that had existed from the beginning of time. This book led many, including Charles Darwin, to understand the importance of geology. Bain read it avidly and learned a lot from it, as we will learn later. But we have inadvertently passed by an important event. On the 13th of October, 1807, a group of like-minded individuals met at the Freemasons' Tavern in Great Queen Street in London and formed the Geological Society, which initially met as a dining club. One of those present was a fellow of the Royal Society, none other than the polymathematic socialite who had been schooled at Eton, George Belus Greenhow. He was the son of a legal man, and he was a talented speaker. He was elected the Society's first president, and we'll come back to him a little later. Meanwhile, at the other end of the social spectrum, a certain William Smith was born in Oxfordshire, the son of a blacksmith. Although largely self-educated, Smith was highly intelligent, observant, and widely read. From an early age, he had shown an interest in fossils, which in those days were referred to as figured stones. He found work in 1787 as an assistant surveyor in Gloucestershire and quickly became proficient in this profession. In those days, canals were an important and only means of transporting large quantities of coal. He worked for several years as a surveyor on canal works for the Somersetshire Coal Canal Company. During this period, he also inspected a number of coal mines, where he recorded and mapped the coal and rock strata exposed by mining activities. This, combined with his observations of the strata exposed in the excavations for canals, proved crucial to the formation of his theories on stratigraphy. He then discovered that various strata would often reappear at different localities in the same relative positions, and that each particular stratum could be identified by the fossils it contained. Initially, he recorded his observations by means of vertical sections, but having seen a map showing the extent of the different types of soils and vegetation around Bath, he realized that the same approach could be applied to his geological work. In other words, he could now produce maps showing the extent of the various geological formations as they outcropped on the surface of the ground. This led to his developing a geological map of the area around Bath in 1799. Using the same techniques, he managed to produce his first rough draft of a geological sketch map of England, Wales, and the southern part of Scotland in 1801. 14 years later, the completed map was published in London, and this was the first geological map of a country in the world. And here we have a comparison of Smith's 1815 map and the modern equivalent. And there are a lot of similarities. But things were not well with Smith's financial situation, which had been stretched to the breaking point by the cost of publishing his geological maps and papers, together with his having embarked on a number of unsuccessful enterprises. In an attempt to stave off his debts, he sold his collection of fossils to the British Museum for the handsome sum of £700. But this amount was not enough, and as a result, he was incarcerated in the King Bench debtors' prison for 10 weeks. On being released, he returned home, only to be met by a bailiff at the door who denied him entry. His property had been seized. In the meantime, Greenhow, well known for being a synthesizer of geological information, rather than being an original researcher who worked in the field and got his boots dirty, was at work producing his own map. He was not convinced by Smith's approach, which made use of fossils to identify strata in different localities, and preferred to rely on the similarity of the mineralogical properties of the rocks. Unlike Smith, he had all manner of social advantages, and furthermore, he was now, once again, president of the Geological Society. So was it surprising that his map took the limelight in 1820, while Smith, now an itinerant surveyor, was out in the field with his survey equipment, battling to recover from his financial woes? Simon Winchester, the author of the map that changed the world, asserts that Greenhow had plagiarized Smith's map. But was this so? At this point, I'm grateful to John Agar, who drew my attention to an article written by Duncan Hawley and Caroline Lamb, published in February 2020, entitled Greenhow's World. In it, they say that Simon Winchester had been unfair at Greenhow and pointed out that his crowdsourced approach had resulted in his map being more geologically and topographically detailed and accurate than Smith's map of 1815. Greenhow's map was finally published in 1820, although preparations were already well in hand by the end of 1814. But the literally poor Smith needed a leg up, and like Cinderella, Smith had a fairy godmother. Well, no, not a fairy godmother. Oh dear, sorry. Now here's Smith's fairy godmother, Sir John Vanden Bempter Johnson. Johnson recognized the value of Smith's pioneering work and took steps to ensure that Smith got the recognition he rightly deserved. It took a little time. In 1831, during Adam Sedgwick's presidency of the Geological Society, Smith was honored with the Society's first award of the Wollaston Medal. It was on this occasion that Sedgwick referred to Smith as the father of English geology. Further honors followed, including the award of an honorary doctorate of laws from Trinity College. But now we must have a complete change of scene and employ our antique magic carpet to bring ourselves back to our part of the Southern Hemisphere. The British had taken over Cape Town in 1795, but then lost it in 1803, before finally taking it over for a second time in 1806. Grahamstown, the second most important town in the Cape at the time, had been founded in 1812, where the frontier wars had begun in 1779 and would continue sporadically until 1819. There in Grahamstown, we meet another three extraordinary, polymathic, persistent and practical Victorian gentlemen. All three of these enthusiasts had an interest in and collected Karoo fossils in the surrounding area and began to get to grips with the local geology. The first of these was Dr. Lawrence Jamieson, who was a staff surgeon at the Cape. Jamieson was residing in Grahamstown from about 1838 and is credited with finding a number of notable fossils. This led to his writing an account of the local geology, which he submitted to the local weekly newspaper, the Grahamstown Journal. His long article headed Geology of South Africa was serialized over at least 3 issues, with the first installment being published on the 3rd of January, 1839. The editor introduced the article by saying, "The following interesting remarks on the geology of this part of the colony have been forwarded to us by Dr. Jamieson for insertion in this journal. We have great pleasure in finding room for them, and we conceive that the public is greatly indebted to Dr. Jameson for this attempt to break through the dull monotony of mere political disquisition." It generated from the local community a huge reaction, and it became a geology versus theology debate, which continued for 6 weeks or so. Jameson maintained that the two could be reconciled, but unlike Parker, who tackled the same subject more than a century later, he could not offer any substantive evidence to support his views. The second of our Grahamstown geological enthusiasts was Dr. William Guyborn Atherstone. He had shown an early interest in geology, medical science, and natural history. He was a founder member of both the Scientific and Literary Society, which led to the establishment of the Albany Museum, the South African Geological Association, and eventually the Geological Society of South Africa. Atherstone is perhaps best known as being the person who first identified correctly the first diamond found in South Africa. He is perhaps less well known for having identified the diamondiferous outcrop in the field that was subsequently referred to as Colesberg Kopje, which became De Beers' famous big hole at Kimberley. Atherstone's association with the third enthusiast brings us to Andrew Hedges Bain, the hero of our story. As Camille told us last week, he was a Scot by birth, and at various times in his life, an explorer, saddle maker, soldier, farmer, geologist, paleontologist, writer, and artist. And of course, he became most well known as a heroic builder of roads and mountain passes. His impressive and lasting legacy in road building was, however, overshadowed, perhaps even more significantly, achievement in being the first to gain an understanding of the geology of the Cape. How did this come about? During 1837, he was in charge of the construction of what was called the Queen's Road between Grahamstown and Fort Beaufort. He became fascinated by the geological formations that he encountered along the route, particularly in the Eka Pass, which traverses some of the lower formations in the Karoo sequence. It was at this time that Captain Campbell, the civil commissioner in Grahamstown, lent Bain a copy of Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology. And here we have Charles and his book again. And in passing, we might note that Lyell himself was an impressive polymath, having been trained as a lawyer and having been elected a Fellow of the Royal Society at the tender age of 33. Anyway, back to Bain. Bain avidly consumed the contents of the book and became an enthusiastic geologist, subsequently remarking that he regretted not having made himself familiar with the subject many years previously. He started collecting fossils in his leisure time. His first major discovery was of a reptile skull with two tusk-like teeth, which he called bidental, and which was subsequently informally given the name of Dinocidon baini. His most famous find, however, was a group of large bones and a skull with a large jaw. Sorry, that's the bidental. And then the much more famous find was what was referred to as the blink water monster, Pariosaurus ceridens, the earliest known vertebrate to give up crawling and to take to walking. Bain's fossil collection grew and grew, and feeling that it was of some considerable interest and significance, offered it to a certain institute in Grahamstown. To his chagrin, his offer was summarily rejected. Not to be put off, Bain then wrote to the Foreign Secretary of the Geological Society in London in April 1844. He described his fossil collection and sent with it a geological sketch map of the southeastern Cape. This created great interest, and Mr. Henry Warburton, the then president of the Society, drew up a paper based on Bain's letter, which was read to the fellows of the Society. Following this, Bain labelled, packed and shipped most of his fossil collection to the Geological Society in London. In 1845, Bain had completed his work on the military roads in the Eastern Cape, and as the Royal Engineers were being reorganised, he was dismissed from the army with a bare note of thanks for his services. He was, however, offered and accepted the post of Inspector of Roads of the Western Cape. His ongoing road building work gave him further opportunities to follow up on his geological interests, and this led him to send another collection of fossils, a geological map of the Cape Colony, and a long detailed memoir to the London Society. This was 1851. And here at last we come to the map. And there is the title of the map, a note. He doesn't say geological map of the Cape Colony, it's the geological map of South Africa. Bain had prepared his map, the first geological map of the country, all on his own, as Smith had done in England before him. As the Geological Society of London acknowledged, Bain's work had been the triumphant results of the single-handed labours and unaided research of one who, by his own perseverance and talent alone, has not only worked out so grand a geological problem, but has trained and wholly educated himself for the task. The map and memoir were subsequently published, and as a consequence, it was recommended that Bain be appointed Geological Surveyor of the Cape of Good Hope. But this was not to be. Instead, he and his son went on with road building work, resulting in the construction of a significant number of mountain passes in the Cape. Nonetheless, he has become quite rightly regarded by present-day geologists as the father of South African geology. And here we have the cover of the centenary publication of the Geological Society of South Africa with 6 prominent pioneering geologists superimposed on a copy of Bain's map, which was presented by the president of the Geological Society in London to the South African Geological Society on the occasion of the centenary. If you have read Simon Winchester's book, the map that changed the world, you will know that Smith's and Greenhalgh's maps of England and Wales may be seen close to each other in the Geological Society's headquarters, which are housed, together with some other institutions, in a palatial Palladian mansion in Piccadilly. Here we have Smith's map, and here we have Greenhalgh's crowd-sourced map, and here the two of them are together at this staircase. And now to the last strand of my tale that brings in Bain and hopefully provides you with a surprise, as it were, on the last page. The results of Bain's painstaking efforts may also be found and seen in the very same Palladian mansion in Piccadilly. I have been assured by my contact at the Geological Society in London that if you make arrangements prior to making a visit, they will bring it out of their archives and show you the original of Andrew Heddy's Bain's geological map of South Africa. It had been painstakingly prepared in his spare time whilst building the mountain pass between Wellington and Ceres that bears his name. This map is somewhat smaller than those of Smith and Greenhalgh, being just over 4 foot long by 2.5 feet wide, but it covers a rather greater area of the Earth's surface. And now, a postscript. A week or so ago, John Bristow circulated a copy of a monumental 130-page paper written by A.W. Rogers in 1937. It was published by the GSSA and was entitled The Pioneers in South Africa and Their Work. It is a very detailed and authoritative source. It covers the work of many of South Africa's earliest workers in the field of geology. As one would expect, he devotes many pages to Bain. What is, however, interesting is that he also devotes a lot of space to the work of Andrew Wiley. He describes in some detail the geological map produced by him in around May 1859. This new map was based on Bain's 1851 map, but incorporates additional information gathered by Wiley. This map is held in the Ziku Museum in Cape Town. It is covered with a mass of handwritten notes, which suggests that it's not a completed piece of work, but it's very much a work in progress draft. I'm very grateful to the staff at the Ziku Museum for retrieving it from their archives and allowing me to take a few photographs of it. Particularly, I would like to thank Eugene Berg and Zaituna Skosan. So here are a few photos of Wiley's map. So thank you, John, for bringing our attention to Rogers' most informative paper, which led me to see the map myself. Thank you. That's it, Henny.
Thank you very, very much, Tony. That was most fascinating. And now we'll open the floor to some questions.
Tony, that map at Zico, it's not displayed, but it's available if you make an arrangement to go and visit it.
Well, actually, the first time I came across it was several years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. And in fact, it appeared to be hanging up in one of the halls of the museum. Mm. I've now discovered that it apparently was a copy of the original. Because when I went there earlier this week to have a look at the map, they explained that what they had dug out from their archive was the original. But when I made inquiries 4 or 5 years ago as to the provenance of the map, I got an absolute blank. And it was only because I read this paper, which you kindly circulated, that I picked up that it was Wiley's map. And in fact, the people at the museum have got no idea of the provenance of it at all. And I'm hoping, having given them a copy of the paper that you kindly provided, that they will now be better informed on the matter.
Yeah, yeah, it just strikes me, and maybe Cameron can just come in here as well. Cameron sent us after a previous talk on Bain, the high resolution scan of Bain's map, which is a wonderful map, plus the cross sections. And if anyone's interested, we can provide it to you. But we should, also get that map.
Hi, John. Sorry.
This
Here was John Malan.
Okay. Yeah, Cameron, we're just saying, I don't know if you saw that bit about the other map that Tony's just talked about, which is in Aziko. We should also get a high resolution scan of that and put it up somewhere.
Yeah, and also at the same time, Aziko should thank us for finding the map for them. So I just want to put that out there, is that we found that map in their collections.
Really?
So we are trying to organize a high resolution scan of it now, but they are not playing ball with us. So yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
They told me day before yesterday that they thought that there was a scan, and that would have been the scan that they used to print the copy, which was hanging on the wall that I saw 4 years ago. So I asked them to try and find that digital copy. So it may exist, but of course there's very little activity at the museum at the moment. And in fact, maybe because of that, it's a good time to press them on this matter.
Yeah, we're trying from our side of here, Tony. We've actually offered to scan the map, everything for them. There are personalities in the way. So they took offense, because I mentioned to them that this map's been sort of missing for some time now, same with the cross sections, and they got very angry that I sort of alluded that they lost the map. I didn't say that you guys lost the map, it's just that you guys weren't aware of the map. And so look, I'm going to let them have if they want to turn this into like a contest where we kick sand on each other's shoes, they can kick sand all over me, I don't care. It's not my map anyways. But they do need to, I think the geoscience community needs to press them now to actually go and look after their stuff before because that map is falling apart, as you probably saw. So, yeah, but look, from our point of view, the CGS has offered wholeheartedly to scan this map in. We've even offered to curate it properly in a climate-controlled room where it should be. It is an extremely important map. Wiley's notation is on there. Even the old timers from the former Geological Commission, their handwritten notes are on that map as well. It is a valuable document. I preach the converted over here. So yeah, that's about it. But I am working on it with them. I'm trying to find a way. I'll let them have their cake on this one.
Okay, and if need be, Cameron, we'll get the old greybeard to quietly go and have a chat to them, and maybe we can make it a announcement that it gets, properly scanned and
as I say, we've got the facilities. We were even willing to come out there and scan it ourselves. I think that I think they're trying to get a victory over here for themselves. So that's probably what it is.
Okay, and Monroe, you're on the call. I mean, don't you have an involvement at Zico? You've been involved in helping them with those presentations.
Everything is political over there, unfortunately.
Okay. Anyway, we'll put it on your lap as well. Maybe through your activities, we can quietly smooth feathers. And let's not get into politics. We have enough of that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Could approach Rukhshana, who's the CEO of Iziko. I wonder if perhaps I'll call her and see if I just can't have a quiet, I'll buy her a coffee or something and chat to her.
Okay, so let's take it offline. We'll pay for the coffee.
Thanks.
Okay.
Want to
Any
record
other,
that, please, Henny?
any other discussion, Bruce? And Bruce, maybe given our discussion earlier this morning about the geoheritage and the UNESCO requirements or proposal, don't you want to just, given that's exactly what we're talking about, just give us a bit of background? I mean, some of this audience obviously won't be aware of all that.
Yeah, I can, but just coming back to this map and the museum down in Cape Town, you know, we also have our run-ins with the Joburg Museum up here, as you well know, the Geology Museum. And quite often our experience as the GMA is that you actually do have to jump over those that you're dealing with and go up to the top, and that often works. But yeah, to come back to the UNESCO, there's been a call made, and it's very short notice, for proposals for geological sites that should be entered onto the UNESCO heritage sites. I received that about a week ago via a committee that I'm on, and I did forward it to Craig Smith at the GSSA, and I think he has now forwarded it out to, I think, to all of the GSSA members, and perhaps, you know, some of the people on this talk aren't actually GSSA members. But John, you now have that information.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is the deadline for this is the 6th of March, which is imminent. And it's not just a case of actually sending through a name saying we want Table Mountain or whatever. There's a template that has to be filled in, which is fairly comprehensive with coordinates and a good motivation as to why it is. But I think it's a very good opportunity, albeit with the clock ticking, to get some of our geological heritage sites on the world map, on the UNESCO map. So again, John, if I can pass the buck to you, as you have those, the template and the information about it, if people are interested, they could perhaps contact you to get them and,
yeah,
you know, to get something.
No, that's great. Thanks. No, certainly we'll circulate them, and, you know, maybe it's a sort of thing, as we discussed earlier, Craig Smith needs to write them a note and say, you know, we have it in hand, and we might just be a few weeks late. But anyway, that's definitely something that we should apply our minds to. And,
yeah, I
just
wonder whether we shouldn't maybe send a gentle reminder to Craig, because I haven't had any reply since I emailed him saying that, because quite a lot of sites have been proposed via emails from quite a few people.
Yeah.
And but he didn't reply when I said that we have to submit that template. You know, that's the critical thing. I don't know whether he's doing it.
Okay, well, and just on this, while we're talking about Andrew Geddes Bain, I mean, is there anywhere, and maybe Bruce, you know, Bruce has got it covered through sort of his Bruce Rubidge through the paleontological work. I mean, is there anywhere that, you know, we could also propose Bain or Bain's work? I guess he covered so many areas and so many aspects, and quite hard to sort of, you know, pinpoint a place where you could build a story around him. Any ideas?
Well, Wellington's at the foot of the famous pass, of course.
Yeah.
What about Wellington? Wellington's got a museum.
Have you seen it, Tony?
I've been to it.
Okay.
Sorry,
do they have coverage of Bain?
I have found a bit of material there relating to the construction of the pass. You know, as you're going out of Wellington, it's on the left-hand side in an old building. I'm not sure if it's simply labeled as being a library or library and museum, but I think it might be worth checking out with them, because, of course, you know, his pass is right there, and his name is there for people to see.
Yeah. Okay, no, good idea. I mean, it's certainly something, if it doesn't sort of get into, you know, into the top ranks, it's certainly the Bain's pass alone is spectacular, and, you know, having his name, and you look at the quality of the work, and there's some fascinating geology there as well. I mean, you could make a good story around that. Okay. Other questions? Neil, I mean, tell us a little bit about the geoheritage in Aussie. And I mean, you sent me some very interesting documents on that. I mean, for example, the Flinders Range project.
Yeah, look, I can't add much, John, except to say that the Flinders Ranges, which is in South Australia, sort of Cambrian to late Precambrian, has had a lot of attention for heritage over the last few years. Special publication of Australian Journal of Earth Science writes some of that up, and they're going down the same path that you're talking about. So that's something to follow if you're at all interested. I guess one other takeaway from tonight is I realised that geologists going to jail, having their houses repossessed, and then fighting and being sort of almost cheated by geological societies just means that we're not trying today. We're not putting everything on the line.
Okay, all right.
I've enjoyed today. Thank you, Tony.
So how does your CV look? You didn't experience any of those?
I still got my house. Yeah.
And just I see Chris Hatton's on the call. Chris, you're involved with all this geoheritage. Are you and Craig talking about the UNESCO requirement or UNESCO program?
Yeah, Bruce wants to, is making a case for Grahamstown as the capital of Gondwana, which I think is a good one. And one of the things you mentioned is that the Overberg Pass is the first thing that is the first pass that Bain's built. So that would be an opportunity to combine Bain's with geology.
Which pass?
The Overberg Pass. Next to Grahamstown.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the first pass that Bain's built, according to Bruce. Okay. So that would be a way of linking Bain's heritage to the Karoo paleontology heritage and having a particular site near Grahamstown.
Okay, interesting idea. Any other comments, suggestions?
Well, just an interesting one. What was it's an interesting use of by Bain on that first map. It's called it the map of South Africa. Because of South Africa, obviously at that time did not exist.
Yeah.
Because the next one I think that was published, I actually got a copy of that. There's this one by, I don't know if you can see this one. This is the introduction to the geology of the Cape Colony.
Okay.
Which was the map by A.W. Rogers in 1905. So yeah, so you had the map also of South Africa, and then I don't know. Whether there were many maps that's in between, but then the next one, the map of the Cape Colony by Rogers.
So maybe Cameron.
I would really sort of like to sort of, almost sort of see a discussion, or let's say see a fairly detailed copy of that Bain map, to just for interest sake, to just sort of see all the formations and, what they were called and so on, at that time. Where can one find a sort of almost a legible, copy of that map?
No, we've got a very good copy that Cameron Penn Clark kindly provided a while back. We'll make sure we send it to you. So,
okay.
It's an excellent scan plus the cross section.
Okay.
We're glad you sent it to you.
Thank you.
And to his credit, and I mean, obviously it's been discussed down here in the Cape. I mean, we've already got the map of South Africa. Do we really need all these other guys, north and east of our borders? So there was method in his madness already.
Yeah, and just to Tony, Tony, I worked a lot with the old Henning Olivier, which I think you worked with on the Orange Fish Tunnel.
Yes, indeed. Currently, there are a group of us who are writing a book about the Orange River project, and I was very disappointed that, of course, dear old Henning has passed on already, because in preparing this book, it would have been good to have had some direct personal recollections from him. I mean, there's plenty of written material, papers and so on, and publications. But yeah, sadly, no.
And he was a good friend of mine
he
because,
was-
I did my PhD on the use of mud rocks, let's say shales and mudstones in road construction.
Yeah.
And obviously, Henning also did work on the, on the mud rocks. So he was a very good friend of mine, and yeah, he died in 2011. So it's already 11 years ago. I actually attended his funeral and give some sort of a eulogy on his contribution to, to engineering geology.
No, he was a very fine fellow. And he certainly, I count him as having been a close friend.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that might be of interest at some stage is to go back and look at this business of the origin of the water which caused the flood at Shaft 2. I've mentioned this I think to John already.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's for another occasion, maybe.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Tony. I think we've come to the end of the hour now.